Okay, so the final part of self-compassion is viewing yourself with understanding and forgiveness. We've talked about the first two. This is the final part, view yourself with understanding and forgiveness. When something goes wrong, we often look for a reason, and we see this. A lot of people decide they were at fault. People who have been victimized in some way do this too, right? They take on that responsibility. This may feel like the right attitude, particularly if you were at fault in some way, but wallowing in guilt has actually been shown to reduce your ability to make amends and move on. If you're the one who had an affair, or you're the one who married the wrong person and you knew it all along, if you go through your divorce like, oh, I'm such a terrible person, I'm such a bad person, you're identifying with that, and that makes it a lot harder to just step up, right, and make the repair efforts you need to make. So if you view yourself with understanding and forgiveness, you can look at a wrong act as an act that's separate from you. You don't get stuck into defending a position that you may not even agree with. So this is really important. We all know how to speak to a friend who's going through a difficult time, but we often speak to ourselves the way we would speak to an enemy. And these harsh words act like internal fangs. Your body responds as if to a physical threat. So you let loose cortisol and adrenaline, you get in this fight or flight state just from this negative talk. And this kind of prolonged fight or flight state leads to stress and real illness, which is not the ideal state for making amends or focusing on your own life and moving forward. One way to shift into a more forgiving mindset is to write yourself a compassionate letter. Like, this is a kind of letter you would write to a friend who's going through a divorce or a difficult time. You might remind a friend of all her strengths. You might say, I really feel for you, but I know you'll do well. Like, you can try this, write this type of letter to yourself. All right, so I decided that I was going to do this recently. I'm going to write myself a compassionate letter. I felt like I was being kind of negative or sort of slipping into this self-judgment. So I got out this notebook that someone had given me, and I'm going to go write this letter. And then I thought, I just need to make some coffee first. So I made the coffee, and I sat down with the notebook. I've got my coffee, and then I thought, I just need to clean the kitchen first, and then and I couldn't believe how hard it was for me to sit down and do this. And I think we can have a lot of resistance to taking a compassionate attitude toward ourselves. And I feel like if you're doing that, if you're like, I'll write this letter as soon as I do my taxes, that's a good sign that you're probably engaging in too much self-judgment, and you really need to give yourself some compassion, some understanding and forgiveness. So another way to increase your understanding and forgiveness is to hug yourself. And actually, as I was talking, I was just like about to do it, right? And it seems very sappy, but this is coming from the leading self-compassion researcher, Kristen Neff, at the University of Texas at Austin. And she talks about hugging and touching as part of our caregiving system, the caregiving system of mammals. We're wired to respond positively to touch. So if you put your hand on your heart, or if you give yourself a hug, you feel that nurturing, even though you're the one giving it to yourself. And then you respond as if it was love from someone else. But actually, that love from yourself is probably more important in divorce. So the third part of commit to self-compassion is view yourself with understanding and forgiveness.